Hello everyone. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space. And a couple more cards using the Simon Says Stamp Pumpkin to Talk About set. I used it a month ago, something. I'll have a link to that video in the end screen at the end of this video. And I just wanted to use it again. And then my brain started going because I wanted to use it with my metallic watercolors. And then I pulled out a second set of metallic watercolors. And then I was like, I wonder how it's going to look on white as well. Or like with white heat embossing. So 2 cards very similar, just switched up. One is white, one is gold. Just fun. And then splatter and embellishments and bling. All the things I love. So as always, I'll have links to everything I used in the description box below the video. If you could just expand that, everything will be listed and linked there. My links are affiliate links. That just means that if you click on one of my links and end up placing an order, I get a little kickback from that at no extra cost to you. It is what helps pay the bills. And then in the end screen, at the end of the video, I'll link to the other one I did using this set, and then I'll also have a link to my Halloween 2024 playlist. I generally do make Halloween cards right up until Halloween because it's fun. Plus, it just builds up my stash for next year because why not? Because, you know, it's just the mood keeps going in my world anyway. So that's it for the housekeeping. Let's get into making the cards. So like always, I am using just regular black cardstock. That said, this is a fairly heavyweight cardstock. I use the Simon Says Stamp black cardstock, which is 110 pounds roughly. Hero Arts pitch black cardstock is really good too, and it's also like a very similar weight. And then there is, of course, black watercolor paper that is on the market. I have never used it for stuff like this, and I've done many videos over the years painting with metallic watercolors on cardstock. Never used black watercolor paper because I've just never needed to. I've got it if something strikes that I feel like I need, you know, because when you're using more water, things like that. But with something like this, a decent heavyweight black cardstock works. If you find that your cardstock is like falling apart or pilling or just like really curling so bad that it just does not work, it's probably because the cardstock's too thin. But yeah, I've never had a problem. So I've got a couple panels here, and they are A2 sized, so 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I use my anti-static powder tool on the cardstock to keep the embossing powder from clinging to anything other than the stamped image. And I'd put this big pumpkin stamp into my MISTI, and I was stamping it with clear embossing ink. And then one panel I am covering with some detail white embossing powder, and then tapping off the excess, dropping the panel. Again, the amount of like, and I left them in. There's another big oopsie a little later on. Anyway, one covered with white and then the other one covered with Simon's gold embossing powder. And then melt with my heat tool. With the white, it's not as exciting to watch on camera because, you know, you can't really see it. Even me, that's why I keep tilting it, because I tilt it in the light because it's like, okay, the dull grainy areas are not melted. Smooth, shiny areas are melted. So I tilt it back and forth. And then it's like, ooh, missed a spot. Because when you're doing a full background, sometimes it's like hard to see. It's hard to tell. So I always give it a minute. This is all sped up in editing, but in real life, I'm like giving it a good, once over. Tilt it in the light, and we're good to go. And then, of course, melting the gold is always my favorite because it's shiny. But same thing. I tilt it to make sure I didn't miss any parts. So let the light reflect, and it's like, okay, no dull grainy areas. We're good. I'm going to remove the excess anti-static powder. I technically didn't need to do this, but it's become habit now because I'm just going to paint over it. It doesn't really affect anything. And then for the painting, I am using the Altenew, like the Artistry by Altenew metallic watercolor palette. I did a video very recently. It was a holiday one though, painting with these. And I was so happy with this palette that I was like, I need to use it again. Like, they're just so good. And they don't have a chalky finish. Some metallic palettes I've used over the years do have a bit of a kind of chalkier look when they're dry, which isn't the end of the world, but it can happen. But the Altenew one doesn't. And then I did also pull out this Finetec palette. This one, I've had this one for a very long time, and I love it. It is beautiful. I avoid using it. I don't know. Sometimes I forget about some of the things I have. I have a thing for coloring mediums, and I likes to have them all, and then I forget for a while, and then I'm reminded. So I pulled that one out, just use a couple colors, but you could totally use this with just the Altenew palette, or if you've got the Finetec palettes, those work great too. They are amazing. Very metallic, and same thing. They don't have a like chalky finish at all. So with metallic watercolors, regardless of the brand, you need to either add water to them, or you just get your brush really wet and you really got to swirl it in there and kind of work it up. It isn't like regular watercolors where you could just lightly touch, a wet brush and it immediately gets color. You've immediately got payoff. Metallics are different because of the way they're formulated. They need a little either time and or effort to, get that color. So I just added water to the colors I thought I was going to use, and then swirl it up real good with my brush and then paint. I have sped this up again in editing, but this is simple. Anyone can do this. This does not require like any sort of, practice, things like that, because with other watercoloring, it takes some time, it takes some practice. You get more comfortable with it as you do it. With this, slap that color on. That's all you're doing. You're just filling in the areas. We ain't worrying about, lighter areas or darker areas. We're not blending any colors. It's just like pick a color, slap it on, fill it in. That's it. And because the images are heat embossed, for the most part, they resist most of the color. There was a few spots here and there after this was all done, before I started like assembling anything, and I didn't think to film it, that had a bit of color sitting on top of the emboss lines. And for that, when everything was dry, I just take a clean damp brush and just kind of lightly wipe it away from those spots. But for the most part, it doesn't matter. It's not too bad. This plummy purple color from the Altenew palette. Oh, look at it. It just, I don't know. That just made my day. I picked that one on a whim, and then I was like, oh yes, love it. Purple pumpkins. Must have, like plummy purple. It's just beautiful. So I was kind of all over the place with these, just filling them in, just jumping around, picking out colors. And then I used this orange from this Finetec one. This is like Halloween orange, just a really good orange. And then I'm going to use that sort of interference color that they call it a mystic color. And I'm going to use that for the stems. Although, after like looking at this in editing, and I even was thinking it while I was doing this, but I already had it in my head. I wanted to paint the stems, but honestly, you could just leave the stems black. If I was going to redo these, I would actually leave the stems black. They kind of pop a bit more, but like I always say, once I get started, I can't stop. And I was already in my head, I was like, I wanted to use that color for the stems. So I did. But like I said, if I was to redo this, I would just leave the stems. It's fun. And it just shows that black cardstock. But I was on a mission. So I just painted everything in. I originally was going to trim these down because, like I said, they were A2 sized, and then changed my mind and decided to keep them as full panels. And they're a little bit warped. Not much, but just a bit. So I just kind of gently folded, like not bending, I'm not putting creases in the cardstock, but I just gently folded them a bit and like bent them back because, like Tim Holtz says, paper doesn't have a memory, and it doesn't. Just to somewhat flatten these out so I could add, of course, some splatter, which is black soot distress paint. Put a bit out of my palette, put these into my splat box, did a decent amount of splatter on here. And then I just got to let that dry. And then, as always, immediately clean out my brush, wipe off my palette, because black soot distress paint dries permanently and it will like stain everything. So while the splatter was drying, I die cut some specialty cardstocks using one of Simon's A2 frames wafer dies, or A2 layers. This is like the second largest one. And with any type of frame wafer die, the whatever's left in the center, I keep that. I'll use that, especially specialty cardstock. I've talked about this. I keep every little scrap of my specialty cardstocks, whether it's the glossies, the metallics, the glitters. I keep all of it because you can use the smaller pieces for, you know, little die cuts and all the things. So I die cut these frames, and then the center pieces I put back with the packaging. So I used matte gold cardstock and then glossy white cardstock to die cut my frames. And with my Empress, I caved however long ago and started like cutting into the magnetic mat for this. No regrets. I like it. With things like little frames and sometimes intricate things, the actual cardstock will like stick into the magnet, especially mine, because you can see it is very cut up. I do a heavy load of die cutting doing this as a job, but I just gently lift it up with my little die pick, my little pointy pick, and then get that off of there and we're good to go. So after I die cut my frames, I took another piece of black cardstock and I'm going to stamp one of the sentiments from that same pumpkin to talk about stamp set. And I'm just going to do the exact same thing. So anti-static powder, I stamp the sentiment with clear embossing ink. One's going to get embossed with white. One will be embossed with gold. And I just use an acrylic block for this because it's just faster. When I'm doing things multiples and it's smaller things like sentiments, you know, or images I might want to stamp more than once, like in different areas. If I want to re-stamp it in the same area, stamp positioner for the win, as always. But for things like this, an acrylic block. So stamp my sentiments, melted them after I'd coated them with the embossing powder, melted them. And then I used one of the rectangle wafer dies to die cut the sentiment, and then there's also dies in the set that you can use to create frames, which I didn't use the last time I used the set. So this time I also die cut little bits of the same specialty cardstock with the frames, so glossy white and the gold metallic. So then once the sentiments are die cut with their little rectangle, I can then add the little frames to it. And there is also wafer dies that'll die cut like just the words, you know, like kind of right up against them, and just gives you options. So for these little frames, I am putting my craft tacky glue on there, and I'm just holding it with my reverse tweezers, and then I gently tap my fingers on the back of it with the glue, like just to pick up some of the excess glue so it's not oozing out everywhere. I've talked about this in other videos too. I don't like anything like sticky on my fingers. I don't mind getting ink on them, like anything, really. It doesn't really bother me. But if it stays sticky, it drives me nuts. But the craft tacky glue does not, even though it's called craft tacky, it doesn't dry tacky. It just dries matte, clear, you know, normal. So I have no problem getting that glue on me because it doesn't, you know, leave that sticky finish that just... The old, like the Tombow Mono Multi that we all used to use before we had the million options we have now, that stuff I loved it as an adhesive. I hated it on my hands. If it got on my fingers, it would drive me nuts because that stuff dries tacky. And that sticky feeling, I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. Okay, moving on. I adhered the frames to those backgrounds and I just put acrylic blocks, my big Hero Arts blocks, on top of them to hold everything flat and let them dry. And then I have just a couple panels of lightweight white cardstock, and I'm stamping those with just a light kind of orange ink. This is melon ink from Simon Says Stamp, and it's still fairly intense. It'll dry back a little bit, but I'll be able to write over this, you know, with a black pen. It'll be fine, and it just gives that extra something on the inside. So I stamp that onto those panels. And then I'm going to stamp another sentiment from the stamp set. This time I went with the Let's Give 'Em Pumpkin to Talk About. And I've got that song stuck in my head. Those that know. And I stamped that with Nocturne ink. And then my card bases are black cardstock as well, the same black cardstock. And they're top folding A2 cards. And here's where the second big oops that I caught on camera. So I left it in here. Put all my glue on the back of the panel, and then I dropped it right there. Easy to fix. Kept it adhered, wiped off the glue, again with my fingers, wiped off my work surface. You can't see it on screen, or at least I can't with my editing, but the glue is still there, like what I wiped off. That's where an adhesive eraser comes in handy. I'll link, there's like multiple options for it now. This thing, I have had that adhesive eraser for no joke, well, pretty much since I started card making. So I'm not sure if this is the original one I had, but I've had it for 15 or 20 years. Because when it gets all gunky, because it'll get really gunky around the edges, you just trim it off. And it'll just keep getting smaller and smaller. But you just trim off the gunky bits and keep using it. And it is a useful little tool to have, because I tend to get adhesive all over the place sometimes. And that's where the adhesive eraser is a game changer. So that's how I fixed that big old oops, was adhesive eraser for the win. So adhere those panels to the inside of the card, adhered the card fronts to the card bases. And then I pulled out another oldie but goodie fave of mine. This was the Simon Says Stamps Abundant Leaves wafer dies, and I die cut it from vellum. And because adhesive shows through vellum, to hide that, I put Big Mama foam tape on the back of my sentiments, and then I'm pressing those die cut leaves into that before fully pressing this onto my card front, and then that will hold these in place, and then you can't see any adhesive. And then to further secure these, because you can't really tell on camera, but these leaves were really curled up because of all the piercing detail when you die cut vellum with dies that have, piercing, stitching, etc. details. Sometimes it will make the vellum curl, which depending on what it is, it's fine. But these were really curling up and kind of annoying me. So I just put a dab of glue under a spot on the vellum, and then I'm hiding that under some embellishments. And those specific embellishments, it's this little container of the Mandarin Pawsitively Dazzling gems. I've used a bunch of these in different videos. These ones, they're glass, and they come in a little container that is way too fun to shake. I'm not going to keep doing that, but it's tempting. So I hid those under a couple dots of the glue, and then I used my blocks again just to hold everything down, just to let that glue dry, because I'm adhering like the vellum to a metallic background, and it needs something just to hold it in place. So stick the big acrylic block on there just to give it a little bit of weight, and then you let that glue dry, and then everything's good to go. So those are my cards. Honestly, I don't like asking people to pick favorites. Sometimes you guys do in the comments anyway, so this time let me know. Do you prefer one over the other? I like them both. I like the pop of how the white just pops, but then I will always love gold. Like, again, I am a magpie. I just shiny, but we've got the shiny metallic on both, the bling, the vellum leaves. These were fun. And you could use one of the other sentiments from the set. They don't have to be Halloween cards. These could totally be like any occasion. I just made them Halloween because I like to. So that's it from me for the moment. All the links and everything will be in the description box below. The other videos will be linked at the end. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you all very soon in another video. Bye. Thank you so much to my amazing Patreon supporters. For anyone that might be interested in joining my Patreon community and supporting me, the link to my Patreon is in the description box below the video. For everyone else, as always, thank you all so much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't, I'd love to have you. And here's a couple other videos for you to check out in case you missed them. Bye!